Hello, and welcome to my new webinar series geared towards the questions that partners are asking and where Microsoft can help. In this episode, we're going to be discussing how we can begin migrating resources to the cloud, and I'm delighted to be joined by Adrian Boyd, who's a partner technology strategist for One Commercial Partner, and Richard Cheney, a cloud solution architect from my team. Now, Richard can't be with us today, but has kindly pre-recorded the demo. But we do have Adrian here in front of the mic. So would you mind giving us a brief introduction?
Hi Dan, thanks for inviting me into the series. As you said, I'm currently a partner technology strategist for Microsoft, working with partners on building practices using our cloud platform and technologies. I've been with Microsoft 10 years now, and it's a very different organization, purely on the rate of evolution of our products. I joined a company where we had a 3-year release cycle between products, to now where every day we're adding new features to a huge range of cloud services, which is really exciting. When you look at the survey results shown here, over half of the respondents said their cloud priorities were about moving more to the cloud and optimizing existing cloud usage. This shows it isn't just about a migration to the cloud and move on elsewhere, it's about optimizing the existing cloud technologies utilized. Whether it's about using only what you pay for, so thinking of IT as a utility as you do with gas and electricity to get the most value, or incorporating the latest developments to ensure that the competitive edge is kept.
Now, I'm sure that by now our partners have bought into the idea of the cloud. Many of them would have spun up a VM or created workloads and seen just how diverse the technology has become. But while the cloud is undoubtedly the go-to resource for new workloads, it can seem a little daunting at times when we think about migration. So let me start by asking you this. If I'm already on-prem, why should I move?
Any business's core mission is essentially to support its customers, be it selling products or providing a service. Maintaining and upgrading servers, server applications, databases, and the hardware that these all require is such a huge undertaking that it's interfering with that core mission. The cost of hardware, software licenses, and people, all the assets that were required to maintain the IT, was tremendous. Plus, there are ongoing software updates and security patches. This requires a considerable budget just to keep the hardware running. What moving to the cloud will allow you to do falls into one of two areas. Mitigate the cost of purchasing all the assets needed to run the hardware and maintain it, and secondly, allows you to create better customer experiences and bring them faster to market to remain competitive. This is where Microsoft can help. Only we have the experience across the technology stack to support on-premise, cloud, or more likely a hybrid scenario that allows customers to move at their own pace.
Okay, so where do we start? How do we begin this journey? Because in my mind, if you're going to go through the upheaval of migrating assets, then it's perhaps an ideal time to perform a little housekeeping. Use it as an opportunity to streamline process and refactor where possible.
The values are proven, so don't want to dwell on this as I believe this is covered amply in your previous webinars on digital transformation. But cloud delivers on a different economic model to accelerate time to market around innovation and agility, as well as the economies of scale that Azure can deliver globally around security or scalability. If we look at the triggers for when you look to moving to Azure, it tends to be around 3 areas. It can be around data center lease renewal, whether on-premise or hosted, and if additional capacity is required. It can be when infrastructure needs a refresh, whether it's the tin, storage, or VMware licenses. The final trigger tends to come from other areas of the business, where the CXO wants to remain competitive or create better customer experiences and are increasingly looking towards IT and specifically cloud as a way to achieve this. The key elements here are around what makes these migrations frictionless, and these are the areas I'm looking to dive into today. Firstly, what workloads can be moved to the cloud, and what are the timescales that need to be delivered upon? Secondly, what tools are available to help me migrate into the cloud? And thirdly, how can I leverage the ecosystem to help me migrate? What programs and offers exist from Microsoft that I can leverage? This is where Microsoft stands alone in the field of cloud providers. Only we have the experience across the technology stack from decades of experience with the on-premise operating systems and the apps and how these translate to cloud-native benefits. Other vendors simply do not have this experience and will in most cases be running Microsoft on their cloud infrastructure. So why wouldn't you use the same vendor you've trusted for years with your on-premise infrastructure and applications to capably manage those services in the cloud and at your dictated pace? We're committed to ensuring that there's a smooth as possible migration into the cloud that factors in the integration between existing systems and taking advantage of the cloud. Take identity. Years of on-premise Active Directory servers has meant security dictated access. So as the workplace moves to be more mobile, the identity simply can't keep up when it involves firewalls and VPNs, which are not user-friendly to access corporate tools and information. The cloud allows the same familiar Active Directory structure, but now the identity plane is the user, and this allows access to tools and data from any location and any device in a secure, safe, and transparent manner. When we look at servers, we're talking about a mix of rehosting to virtual machines when it comes to core infrastructure and potentially legacy apps, but when we get to the app servers themselves, these are usually best served by utilizing the software as a service provided by Microsoft, so Exchange, SharePoint, and similar. Databases are best served by utilizing our platform as a service where possible, so SQL managed by us at Microsoft to manage a lot of the plumbing. This certainly doesn't mean if you have a legacy app with a ton of third-party extensions that you can't just move to SQL IaaS, though, to ensure continuity for now, while you look to develop and modernize at your leisure. We also recommend you look at the different database destinations in Azure you can leverage. So there's a range of data factories, data lakes, and distributed Cosmos DB options, also tailored to what function your database is supporting with big or unstructured data. With data, we're talking about storage for archiving or file servers and associated roles. These can be replicated in Azure to avoid ballooning on-premise storage costs of increasing data, or refactoring file servers to services such as Azure Files, or if there's huge amounts of data, such as terabytes or petabytes that need to be shifted, then physical options of couriering storage to upload directly to Azure data centers, such as Azure Databox. With apps, these could be internal line of business apps, which could be HR tools for expenses or holiday requesting, or CRM. Or it could be external customer-facing apps delivered via web or mobile. These should follow previous guidance that if there are legacy apps that aren't strategic, then these can form part of a rehosting strategy. But generally with apps, you can go down the modernization route to deliver the better experience, such as refactoring app components in Azure, or re-architecting them completely in Azure to ensure they are secure and optimized for efficiency. There are exceptions to this. If the customer has made so many customizations they are uncomfortable refactoring, Microsoft is geared towards allowing customer choice. So you want to move that SharePoint server with untold customizations onto a virtual machine? That's no problem. We aren't forcing you down a narrow path.
So there are various options for how you move to the cloud. Could you perhaps cover those for me?
Sure. Essentially, when you assess the workloads you have, the options can be broken down to these 4 areas: rehosting, refactoring, re-architecting, and rebuild. Rehosting is redeploying an existing application to a cloud platform without modifying its code. The application is migrated as is, which provides baseline cloud benefits such as hardware, storage, and networking without the risk or costs of making code changes. You'd use this when developing the capabilities of the app isn't a priority, or you just need to scale usage of the app without investing in the hardware to do so, such as scaling up capacity for seasonal purposes. Refactoring is minimally altering application code or configuration changes necessary to optimize the application for Azure Platform as a Service and take better advantage of cloud. Put simply, this means taking advantage of Azure, managing not only the hardware requirements and the operating system, but also additional supporting code such as the SQL database, moving to an Azure managed SQL service, or using our Azure Container Service to wrap up your app for delivery. This allows it to be deployed faster if necessary to scale, or if the app would benefit from a continuous DevOps development strategy. Re-architecting is to modify or extend the existing application's architecture and optimize it for cloud platform and better scalability. This means breaking down the application and significantly recoding areas to allow for not only cloud-native benefits around scalability and management, but also allows for multiple development teams to work on the different components they are responsible for in a more agile development experience when broken down into microservices. Finally, rebuild the application from scratch using cloud-native technologies on Azure essentially allows you to start from the ground up to deliver a better optimized application that fully harnesses the benefits of Azure technologies, such as our AI platform or our globally scaled services, such as Cosmos DB. So as I referenced earlier, Microsoft is a channel-focused organization that has a wide range of partner solutions to assist in this journey, from the likes of Mover and Veeam, but I wanted to demo a recently released tool from Microsoft to help in the assessment stage of what a cloud migration topology would look like, and what it would cost in Azure. Azure Migrate was in preview up until earlier this year and is now generally available as a free tool. And what it offers is an infrastructure and network monitoring tool that will not only mirror what the on-premise virtual machines are in Azure, i.e. map cores and RAM, but actually look at performance, CPU usage, bandwidth through peak performance and resource optimization, as well as network dependencies to create what the infrastructure would look like when optimized in Azure. This is currently available for VMware infrastructure, as we are aware that this is the predominant virtual machine toolset in the marketplace currently, so you don't have to just look for Microsoft proprietary networks.
So let's take a look at how this works. Now, as I said, Richard can't be with us today, but has kindly recorded the demo in advance. With that, let's jump in and take a look.
Okay, we're starting on the homepage of the portal, and if you click on Create a Resource and search for Migrate, you'll find Azure Migrate in the list there. Has some information about what we're currently covering. So at version 1, it's only covering VMware vCenter clusters, only for versions 5.5, 6.0, and 6.5. In the future, we'll be looking to cover Hyper-V as well. And then after that, physical servers. And in time, the whole framework will expand to cover some of the third-party ecosystem that we have around both the assessment and the migration parts of the workflow. We'll click on Create. And then we'll select a name for the migration project. I'll just put in Migrate Demo here. Choose your subscription, resource group, and the location. Now the location for it is either West Central US or East US, which is what I'll choose here. This is where the metadata goes. So the metadata collected from vCenter is purely about utilization. There's no access to VMDKs as part of that. The only bit of information you need to be a little bit concerned about if you're talking to your customers about that is that the names of the virtual machines and the IP addresses will go through. But normally that's private IP addressing, doesn't mean anything for most people. It's just the name of the virtual machines. So we'll click on Create at that point, and that'll go through and create the project for us. So the job is created, and here we have the Migrate Demo resource group. I'll click into there. And here you can see we have a few resources which have been created automatically. You do get a log analytics area and a migration project as part of this. Log analytics is very important when we come to look at some of the mapping services we have between the various systems that we'll be assessing as part of this. But if I click into the Migrate demo to have a look at the migration project itself, and then on the left-hand side, you can see there's a Getting Started area with Discuss and Assess, and the main pane actually links to this as well. So if I click into that, then it gives you a little guide as to what you need to do to start discovering your machines. Once you discover those machines, then it's really about creating the assessment and seeing the reporting from that. So click on Discover Machines, and I'll take you through to the main screen there. And this is where you have the collector appliance. This is an OVA file, which will be familiar to anybody who's been working with VMware ESXi for a number of years. It's about 10 gig in size. So it does take a little while to come down, but there's nothing unique specifically about this OVA file compared to any other migration project you spin up within Azure. So once you have it downloaded, you can put it onto a USB stick and then reuse it from that point onwards, just to save downloading it each and every time. Once you then have that imported into vCenter and have it configured to start doing the collection, then it'll collect the data and it will send it through. But as part of that configuration, you'll need these details down the bottom. So you have project credentials, both an ID and a key, and you'll need to copy those out and put those somewhere safe before you start working with those. So once the 10 gig OVA file is downloaded, you can then import it into your ESXi cluster by going into vCenter and doing File, Deploy OVF file. Anybody who's been an administrator on vCenter-based systems for a while will be familiar with this process. And once the virtual machine has then spun up, and the virtual machine itself is a Windows 2012 R2 machine, and it's thin provisioned as well, then if you log on to the console screen, this will be what you see when you first go on. It's got a number of prerequisites which need to be met before it can then go ahead and discover the virtual machines and connect through to the project we created within Azure itself. So here's the prerequisites, and there's an end user license agreement. Then the internet connectivity is the next area. The only connection it needs is an outgoing 443 connection, so just straightforward HTTPS, which should be fairly easygoing for most firewall systems. But if you do have a proxy in between that and the internet as well, then you can make use of the proxy settings here to then configure up your proxy within this. It'll then integrate the Azure Migrate Collector service and start that up. And then it'll give you some links to allow you to install VMware Power CLI onto this virtual machine as well. Now, we can't include Power CLI in the image. It can't be baked in for legal reasons, but we do make it fairly easy to install it through this route and double check that it's there. And then once NTP has been set up for global time synchronization, then you're good to go on this section. Once you've met all the prerequisites, you'll have a good selection of green ticks to show that everything's where it should be, and then you can click on the blue continue button to move down the list. This takes you through to discover virtual machines. You can then point it to the vCenter IP address and give it the username and password of an ID which has got the ability to read the information in vCenter. So it doesn't need to be a full administration ID, does not need read-write access or anything at a high level, just needs to be able to read the information that vCenter has been collecting automatically. And it gives you an ability to test that connection to ensure that your credentials are correct in the first place. You then have the ability to select your scope as well. So if you want to select a particular data center, then you can do that within the scope, or any scope definition that you have set up and configured within vCenter, it allows you to do that. And one of the other things which is really nice about this is if you've been using tagging to automatically group your virtual machines together, then you can again use a vCenter tag category, which will automatically group your virtual machines when you see the outputs in the assessments as well. When you then move through to the project, that is where you need to paste in the project ID and key that you copied out earlier from the Migrate demo project we spun up on Azure. Then it knows exactly where to send all the metadata information that the virtual machine collector is taking out of vCenter and then pass that through to the project. And once you're done, you've completed the collection, you can then start discovering. This will give you the information about which vCenter server and scope it's looking at, but also keep a running total of the discovered virtual machines as it goes through. It'll also give you an idea about how long it's going to take. We have seen small systems run through in a matter of minutes. Some of the larger ones can take a couple of hours to go through. But after that time, the data will be collected within the portal. You can go back to the Azure portal and start browsing through the information that's been collected and make sense of it from there. And that's where we'll go next. So the data collection itself will take all of the historical data from vCenter, which by default is 30 days worth of data. And then you can go into your migration project and see the results of that. So I'm going to go into one which has been created for us to demonstrate this. So this is some mocked up data from some real machines that has been collected into this Contoso demo area. But it's very much the same as the area we created earlier with the discover and assess on the left-hand side. But now we're going to browse through the machines, through the groups, and then create the assessments from this. So this is really at this point using Azure Migrate to do that whole assessment of the environment. And it's really going to give you 3 key bits of information. Whether or not the source machines are viable for Azure, a right sizing element to suggest what would be the right size of virtual machine family to use on Azure platform. And lastly, the estimated cost for that. And there's some parameters we can put around that to get the information we'd like to see out of that. But let's have a look at the machines first. So if I click on machines on the left-hand side, then it'll show, as you saw from the main screen, we've got 336 machines which have been collected into this area, and here they are. Now, one of the first things you'll notice, there's quite a lot of information here. It shows you the name of the virtual machine, what it's a member of. It's got some dependencies, we'll come back to that in a second, but it also shows the number of vCPUs which are involved, how much virtual memory that virtual machine has been allocated, the number of disks, the amount of storage, network adapters, and which operating system it's running. Now, as you can see, we've got 23 pages of information we have from here. You can filter on this, you can search, you can do stuff based on tagging in groups, and that will give you the information needed at that level. But I just want to focus on this part here, which talks about requires agents. Everything we've done so far has been a light discovery. So this is the least intrusive path to get some of the information about the viability of those virtual machines. If you want to go deeper, then you can install the agent to get that information for you, and actually give you the option of installing 2 agents. So I'll just click on that just to get a view as to how that looks. So this then gives you the ability to download and install the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, the MMA. It's got both the Windows 64-bit and Linux versions of those. Now, this is the same one that's used by Log Analytics and a number of other services once those virtual machines are in Azure. So in some ways, this is actually helping to get those virtual machines to have the agent they need once they've been migrated over, but it does give us greater insight into those virtual machines. So to give an example of that, if you take just the information from vCenter for, say, a CentOS server or a Red Hat server, let's go for the Red Hat one, then it'll let you know that it's Red Hat version 4, 5, 6, or 7, which is good, but this means that from our perspective, we only support Red Hat from version 5 onwards. So the report will tell you that it's good with caveats. It needs to be double checked just to make sure it's not an older Red Hat 4 system which will not be supported on the Azure platform. Whereas if you download the monitoring agent and have that running on those virtual machines, then that gives you a greater level of insight into those and some more information about the operating system in general. The other one is the dependency agent. Now, this is part of the mapping service. So this then starts collecting information about the IP-based communication going on between virtual machines within that ESXi cluster. So if you have specific services sending data around, it will collect that and it will start naturally grouping those systems together. Now, most migration projects, you end up doing a phased migration into Azure. That's a fairly standard thing, not just in Azure, any migration project. And having a good grouping of those virtual machines means that you can provide the least level of disruption to services. And this helps you gain an insight as to which systems are connected together. To complete configuration for the Microsoft Monitoring Agent, just add in the ID and the key for the Log Analytics workspace. Okay, let's click back on the breadcrumbs to return to the machines list we have here. I can filter on that list to have a look at service. If I click on tier, then it will come through and just filter down to those. And you can see that a number of these have got view dependencies rather than require agents because they do have the agents on them. So if I click on one of those, let's take middle tier to view the dependencies. Then the map data comes up. I'll just close down the legend so we can see a little bit more of that. And this is the default view, and we can move that around. We can enlarge it to zoom in different areas if it's a big complex map. This one's quite simple. And you can also then increase or decrease the level of detail. So if I click on the expand, you can see that suddenly there's a lot more information about which services are running, which processes, and which individual IP addresses are hitting the ports on different servers. And I can go into an even greater level of detail across that if I do the second level. So then you start seeing additional links coming in. So you get a really good idea about which systems are talking to which systems and on which ports they're doing so. Okay, so we can run assessments, but not against individual machines. We run assessments against groups of machines. So let's do just that. So when we create a group, we can either add in every single server that we have within that collection, which if it's of a modest size is sensible, or if you want to then filter down to individual servers, you can do that. So I'll again filter back down to the list of tiered servers in a second. First off, we'll just put in tiered servers migrate demo as our description. If I then search on tier, then filter it down to the 8 servers that we had before. Now I can either individually select these, or I can just use the select tool to add all of them. And then I can either create a new assessment there and then, or just create it there. And then I can filter down to those servers to be able to view them properly. If we click back into the group now it's been created, then it will take us to our list of 8 servers as we'd expect to see. Now we could click on create assessment here or view any existing assessments that we have. As you can see, we don't have any yet against this. We can choose the columns. You can also have a look and see which of your servers have got the agents installed for the dependencies and which require installation. we can go into the view dependency screen. That'll take us back into that service map, but rather than looking at it from the perspective of one server and what it's connecting to, it's going to look at the whole group and the interrelationships between all of those different servers. The two servers which don't have the agents on it, data tier VM03 and middle tier VM03, they'll appear slightly dislocated from the others. They won't have those lines of connectivity there. So you could then add those agents to those and they'd be part of that bigger mesh explaining the connectivity between those different services. Okay, so let's click on Create Assessment and actually create the assessment for this group. So if I click on Create Assessment here, now the temptation as always is to click on the big blue button which says Create Assessment, but it's really important to click on this View All button here. This actually contains all the parameters which are going to control how the assessment is going to be created. So let's have a look and see what that has. Now, one of the key things it has is the target location. So if you know you're going to be deploying to, say, West Europe or into UK South, for example, then you can set that as the target location. And that obviously then permeates through to the pricing that you see based on the pricing for that specific location. So let's pick UK South. You then have the choice of either the standard or the basic tier. The basic pricing tier really includes those virtual machine families which do not have things like high availability and other enterprise level features. So they're really only suitable for test dev. So we'll keep that on standard. Then you have a choice as to whether or not you're going to aim for premium managed disks or standard managed disks. So premium being the SSD, standard being the hard disk drive ones. And then you have the choice of reserved instances. This is fairly new for those of you who haven't looked at Migrate for a little while, but it gives you the choice of either saying that you don't want any reserved instances, but if you know you have workloads which are going to be on 24/7 or for a section of that time for 1 year or 3 years, you can make use of reserved instances to bring down your pricing. So I'll select 3 years reserved for those. The next section is the sizing area. This is really key to making sure that the right size of virtual machines is selected for the assessment by Migrate. So the default here is as on premises. This means it's going to match up the number of CPU and virtual memory and the disk sizes that you require to match up what you had on premise. This is quite a conservative way of doing things. We see on average about 8% in terms of VM utilization in on-premises VMware clusters. So therefore everything is usually over-spec'd in terms of the size of the virtual machine. So you can normally get away with something a lot smaller when you move to Azure. And obviously we're talking about utility computing. So you want to make these as effective as they can be. So you have the choice to then change this from as on premises to performance based. This will start looking at the performance data, and we're going to increase that to 30 days to match the data we've taken from vCenter in the first place. And then you get to choose your percentile of utilization. So 95th percentile is the default here. If you wanted to make that very aggressive, you could move that down to the 50th percentile, which would mean it would match the median for what it needs to do over that period. But obviously, anytime it peaks past that point, then you're starting to hit the limits of what that particular virtual machine can do. So normally most people pick something in the 90th, 95th or 99th percentile. 99th percentile means that your virtual machines will be that much larger because you're catering for those peaks for greater periods of the time. So we'll keep that on 95th percentile for this particular assessment. You can obviously tweak that if you want to later on. VM series allows you to select from either that standard or basic pricing tier of virtual machines that you want to do. So we could do select all, or we could select those from the DV3, DVS3, or whichever subsets that you want to do for different series. So we'll just pick a couple here to get the numbers we want to get out. And lastly, you have a comfort factor. So this is really how much contingency do you want in the size of the virtual machines that you have. So rather than making them just big enough for the performance data we collected, which would be 1, we're putting in a 30% contingency with that 1.3 times comfort factor. If you want to make that really conservative, you could double the size of the virtual machines compared to what the performance data is saying that you need and put it down 2 times. Or you can select one of the others in the list that we see below. Finally, you can then move down to the pricing section. So the offers there will depend on your subscription as to whether or not it says pay-as-you-go or more likely enterprise agreement or cloud service provider. You can then select the currency, defaulting to US dollar here, but we can switch that to whichever one, so we'll move that to British pounds. And then you can put a discount percentage in if that's applicable to the pricing that you're doing in the first place. Now, in terms of VM uptime, if you want to tweak the numbers, then you can change it from 31 days per month and 24 hours per day to get something which is just using a subset at the time. So if you wanted to see something for a test dev environments where you know you're going to snooze those servers outside of working hours and switch them off at weekends, then you could select the basic pricing tier at the top and switch that down to fewer days in the month and fewer hours per day in doing so, and get something which is closer to the pricing you'd really expect to see. The final one, which is going to have an impact on the pricing, is the Azure Hybrid Use Benefit. So for those Windows servers where you have existing on-premise Windows Server licenses, which entitle you to a number of virtual machines, you can leverage that by using Azure Hybrid Use Benefit and saving a significant percentage of the cost of those Windows virtual machines when they're running in Azure. So Azure is still the cheapest place to run your Windows virtual machines. So that's the assessment properties. We'll just save that and then run the assessment. Okay, so now our assessment properties reflect what we want to see in the assessment. We can click on the blue Create Assessment button, and then that's going to go away and create the assessment. It doesn't take very long. This is only a few servers that we're doing here. So we can now have a look and view the assessments. As you can see, the number of assessments is on 1 now. Then you'll see your list of assessments. So if you've got different groupings, if you've got different assessments, you can filter down on those when you look at them as a group. We'll click into this one individual one. This has got a high level of confidence against it. So this is the main dashboard you see when you view an assessment. And as you can see, there are 3 key donuts on the main page here, which show different aspects of the viability of the different virtual machines for readiness on Azure, the cost estimate for the compute and storage, and then drilling down into the storage, how much of that is on standard managed disks and how much is on premium managed disks. Our managed disks is not factored into anything to do with Azure Migrate. At the top, you can also see some of the criteria against it and drill into that detail or go back to the original group. Now, if we have a look at the different servers by looking at the Azure Readiness on the left-hand side, you can also click through on those donuts to get through to those sections. You can see we have a list of different servers and the applicability of them to running on Azure. So it'll tell you whether or not there's an unsupported boot process. As you can see here, this one's got a boot type of EFI, which is not supported on Azure today. But the good news on that is that we can migrate using something like Azure Site Recovery, and Azure Site Recovery enables us to convert that from a UEFI boot disk back to a legacy BIOS disk once it's in Azure. So that is something that we can cope with. Likewise, we have conditional support or conditional endorsed support for different servers. We'll have a look at that when we have a look at the spreadsheet in a minute. But that is picking up on the fact that those specific servers need to be double checked to make sure that they're going to be viable for running within Azure. As you know, Azure has got a specified list of what is supported in terms of operating systems on Azure, and the information we're getting from vCenter here, for example, on that CentOS server says 4, 5, 6, or 7. It's only 5, 6, and 7 which is supported. So we need to do some digging to find out which ones are good. Let's have a look at the cost details, which again is looking at the compute and also the storage side of things. So here you can see the cost estimate for the compute is £260 per month, and the storage is £103 per month. And the £103 is split itself. If you look at the standard disks, that's almost £38, and then 66 on the premium managed disks. But you can have a look at the individual servers, and it gives you the idea of what size it's picked from the allowed virtual machine families that we picked earlier. So which are going standard F1 and which ones are going on to D8, D4 servers. You can see the size of the disks for the operating system and for the data side. And then you can see the compute and the storage costs for those. So that's how we see the list of assessed machines at that point. The other thing we can do is we can export the assessment and have a look at this information in Excel. So click on the Export Assessment button at the top. That'll then download the file. We can open it in Excel here. So this is the main tab that we're looking at, the assessment summary within the spreadsheet. And you'll see that it's got some key information about the subscription, the resource group, the project name, and some other assessment viability stuff. We also have a cost estimate for the compute and the storage, and the split down into the standard disks. If we look down, we can see that the 3 donuts we had from that main dashboard page when we looked at the assessment within the Azure Migrate project are listed here as well, so we can use this information in emails or in other documentation. And it shows the number of servers which are ready for Azure, which are ready for conditions and unknown. Likewise, the breakdown for the cost estimate and also the storage cost as well. If we have a look at the list of assessed machines, obviously we only have 8 servers here, but you can get some really useful information if you're looking at a larger number. And we have both the names of the machines, their readiness, some of the details for the readiness, and then the size, the cost, and some additional information which goes beyond what we could see previously when we looked at the list in the actual portal. So some good information here collected on behalf of those different servers. But let's go back to some of the reasons. So as you saw, the majority of the servers here were ready for Azure. A few of them were ready, but with conditions. So the data tier VM03 here, that's got boot type not supported, which again is going back to the fact it's a UEFI server, and we can cope with that one. Here we have Windows Server versions supported with caveats, and again the one down here is the CentOS one, which is endorsed with conditions for particular Linux distributions. Now on the main dashboard page, if you click on the blue links for each of those error messages, well not error messages, warning messages if you like, then it will take you through to some of the Azure documentation, which then explains what that message means and where to go for more information to check against your virtual machines to see whether or not something needs to be done or considered before you can see whether or not it's viable for Azure. The last thing on here is we have the assessment properties. Now, if you end up running multiple assessments, perhaps you are talking with a customer and you want to tweak that confidence rating or reduce down the list of virtual machine families that you want to have supported in Azure, then this shows the different parameters you have for the assessment as selected. So it means if you then recreate the report, you can always go back to this and see what were the parameters that were defined when running this assessment in the first place. And as you can see here, we've got the target location, we have the comfort factor, we have the percentile for the utilization rate, and we have the different VM families and everything else we configured within that screen. So it's really useful if you do start changing things, you can always go back and be sure that you're looking at the right thing by checking the assessment properties. Okay, let's close down the Excel file. So here we are back on the main portal screen. And I just want to summarize by saying that, as you can tell from the conversation earlier, we see a really good and interesting roadmap as more functionality is added into the Azure Migrate service and the scope of what it can assess grows and the tools are better integrated into the whole experience. But even today, you get a lot of value out of the service. It's a very quick way of having a look at those vCenter ESXi clusters on premise and getting some good numbers for your target Azure location. Right size based on the performance data, and you therefore get the right size of family in the target environment plus the pricing for that. So it's a very quick and easy way for getting to those numbers. But it's also useful in terms of understanding the confidence of the viability of those servers to migrate into Azure and also the relationships between those if you start making use of the extended information provided by the agents.
So Adrian, can you talk us through some of the resources available to partners?
So here are a list of resources to go to as a partner to support you in building an Azure data center migration practice. Firstly is the link to the Azure Migrate tool itself with supporting documentation. Secondly is a link to the Azure Migration Center. This site breaks down each step of the journey across assess, migrate, and optimize with artifacts to assist at each step. Third is a link to the Azure Migration Partner Community. This is a community site where various resources are provided to support the partner channel, such as webinars, migration offers, and assistance. Fourth is Fast Track for Azure. This is a program where, if the opportunity is sizable enough, we will offer internal Microsoft engineering support for the migration and deployment. Lastly is the Azure Migration Campaign site, which is a list of assets to help in positioning the Azure migration journey to prospective customers.
I'd also like to add that after the success of my Build a Company and Citrix on Azure videos, I'm now working on my next, Migrate a Company to Azure, which will be an end-to-end training video looking at migrations across both physical machines and the major hypervisor platforms. And let me take this opportunity to thank our friends at Intel for the donation of the NUCs. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Adrian, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and explain how partners can begin migrating resources to the cloud using our portfolio of tools. As always, it's my wish that you have enjoyed this session, and I'd like to remind you that these sessions are driven by you. Simply reach out to me on social media if there's anything that you would like to see, and I will source the experts and make it happen.